We are starting to come to a close at the end of our unit, so we're going to start taking a look at the things that influence political ideas and then ultimately can influence how our politicians end up making decisions on the behalf of the people. So, politicians are able to start understanding what their constituents really want by polling them and getting their opinion either by doing a sample size or a progress check in kind of a situation. So, we're going to take a look at these different techniques and we're also going to look at when are they sometimes untrustworthy in making political decisions. So we'll take a look at some good examples and some bad examples of polling questions. So, when did this even really become a thing of getting public opinion and having that help decide politics, elections, things like that? So, our first situation was in 1963, one of the most famous polling situations to happen. And this is going to be a bad example of taking public opinion. So, in 1963, we're looking at um, Franklin D. Roosevelt and his reelection campaign. So, the Literary Digest was a newspaper column. You had to pay in order to get it. And so, they took a straw poll of their readers in order to determine how do you plan on voting. Okay, so something you should know is a straw poll is an unofficial vote. This is not the official political process happening here. It was just truly a newspaper column trying to get a random opinion of their readers. Now, we call this situation a straw poll because it's named after like farmers holding up a piece of straw in the wind and trying to determine, okay, what's the weather going to be like? Same idea here of like you're just getting a taste for what people are thinking at the moment. So, Literary Digest ended up polling 10 million individuals, okay? But only 2.4% responded to their polling. So, out of this, we end up finding that they didn't accurately predict who was going to be the president, the next president. They made this big long statement of like, we know who the next president is going to be based on the results we've gotten. And then it came out to be completely false. So, what are the faults? Why did this happen? Well, Literary Digest was only polling the rich, especially during the Great Depression. 1963, the only people who are still going to be buying these type of items have a disposable income. Okay, so they were only asking a very specific type of population to respond to an election question. But there are many other people in this country who take part in politics. And so they didn't have an accurate taste, like I said earlier, they didn't have an accurate representation of what the common person was looking at voting towards in the 1963 presidential election. Okay, and so, because of this, there was bias in the source that they were trying to get their information from. They were only gathering election campaign ideology from your upper to middle class, people who still had jobs, and people who, had, like I said, disposable incomes. So, because of that, you're leaving out anyone who has lost their job, anyone who was hit financially by the Great Depression. You are potentially leaving out minorities like women, people of color. And so, because of that, they didn't really get an accurate representation of the population. So, since then, we really take a look at how are we getting our information and do we know if it's going to be accurate or not, especially if we're sharing that information out and making a statement of, here's the big results, here's what we think is going to happen. You got to know. You need to have gathered that information unbiasedly. Okay, so George Gallup at the same time gave a correct prediction. And so, because of his system of polling and his metrics, he created this new era of getting public opinion and then making political movements off of that. guiding forward political campaigns, or even trying to get a sample of what your constituents want me to vote like. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some of the examples of these different types of polling in American politics. Okay, so scientific polling and then the given results end up influencing a lot of public policies and the way that our institutions work. So, the way that we end up seeing polling done is by opinion polls, your benchmark goals, tracking polls, entrance polls, and your exit polls. So, I'm going to go over each of those as we move forward. Okay, so we're going to take a look at first your opinion polls. This is when you take a sample group that you hope to then represent a larger group of people, and then you're going to put it in kind of a fixed question form. So the best way we can think about this on a more high school level is, say that administration is trying to get an idea of, should we have snow coming next year? What should the theme of snow coming be next year? And instead of sampling, questioning all of our 800 plus students, administration may just go to student council, where you only have like 4 or 5 people from each grade level helping make decisions, right? You have that small sample group, which would be your student council members that represent a class, and they represent that larger population, right? So only sampling those 4 or 5 students rather than sampling the whole 200 out of a graduating class, and then using those results to make a decision. Okay, that is an opinion poll. Your next one, it's very common, especially when we're looking at campaigning. This is called your benchmark or your tracking polls. This is where you are getting data along the way and you're doing it multiple times. Okay, so say we have someone that is running for presidency. As soon as they put their name out there as a bid, let's poll a population and see how popular is this person going to be. And so then, say in a couple of months or after major debates each happen, you're going to send out more polls and try to get more data in order to see, okay, where's my standing and compared to other people? Am I still popular? Do I even still have a chance at winning this thing? Should I maybe pull out and use my resources to help another candidate? Okay, but it's getting those benchmarks along the way in order to determine if you want to continue in campaigning towards an elected position. Next, we have our entrance polls, and these are the polls that are typically taken before entering into a voting booth. So, as you're standing in line, or even more recently, we've seen political parties really start to do cold calling, where they will get a random sample of phone numbers and you'll have someone call you during election season and say, "Hello, I am a representative of the Democratic National Party based out of Michigan. We just would like to ask you a few questions of who are you planning to vote for this year? Why do you plan on voting for that person?" And again, it's just trying to get an idea of like, okay, are we going to be shocked when it comes to election day? How can we get data before the other side or the other candidate, the other party's candidate? Okay, but something to know about your entrance polls is that they aren't the most reliable system for gathering your data. There's a higher margin of error. And the reason for that being is the voting hasn't taken place yet. So I could have, the DNC call me up on my cell phone, and maybe I'm an anxious person, or maybe I really don't like telling them, like, oh, I'm not voting for your person. And so they're going to take that data thinking that that's how I'm going to vote. But I could always change what my final vote is once I walk through those voting doors. Okay, so it's not solid data because it's not 100% the truth. There's always room for people to change their decisions. Okay, exit polls, on the other hand, are polls that are taken after you're leaving the voting booth. This may be someone with a clipboard standing like way on the other side of the street, because we're going to get into campaign laws, but This may be someone from a party with a clipboard that just is asking you, how did you vote in the election? You don't have to tell them anything, okay? You are not obligated in any type of form to talk to these people, but it's another way for them to get the data. Because if they can again sample, like, okay, it looks like a lot of people coming out of this county are voting one way, then we can start to say, like, all right, we've got good chances. Let's focus our campaign efforts or our media efforts in another county because it looks like we're going to win this one, already. Okay, so exit polls way more reliable than those entrance polls. Now, these type of polling, your entrance and exit polls, these are the ones that are typically used the most by your big media outlets and those campaigns. So when you hear like CNN, Fox, AP News, all of those major outlets, they've been out there doing these entrance and exit polls. That's how they're able to say, yep, it looks like we maybe have a winner already, or it looks like so and so is a lot more popular in Michigan right now than in Florida. That's because of these entrance and exit polls that they're doing. So when we're looking at not just the tactic of like how are they getting that data from you, but we also need to take a look at what kind of questions that they're asking and when does it go wrong? When do we get bad data that doesn't accurately represent what people really think? Okay, so when we look at our types of questioning, bad questions are the biggest reason for inaccurate data. And our questioning can be either bias or leading in some way to where a person may feel uncomfortable answering a certain way. Or maybe they didn't quite understand the question or what specifically you were looking for because of the way it's worded. So we're going to take a look at a couple of examples of what are bad polling questions and then what could be some better alternatives. Okay, so a bad question. This is from a Parrot Mail survey, and the question was going out, should we eliminate foreign lobbyists completely, no loopholes, and make it a criminal offense? So I want you to think for a couple of seconds of like, how could this be a misleading or a biased question? Right? You're walking up to a stranger on the street. What's wrong with this question here? Well, you're asking them if we should completely eliminate something, right? You're not giving them a this or that. It's just, is it eliminated? No loopholes. And then you're adding in almost a second style of question, a completely different question. Should it be a criminal offense? Right? So if you're asking someone yes or no, and you've provided this question, should we eliminate foreign lobbyists completely, no loopholes, and make it a criminal offense, you've got two questions there. So they may feel yes on one part of it, but no on the other. But all you're going to write down is the yes or no. So that's a misleading question on what you're actually asking them to. You're asking them too much in one question. Okay, so as you go out into the adult world, always consider like, what kind of questions am I asking people? And what kind of questions are people asking of me? And always ask for clarification if needed. Okay, another example, I kind of touched on it in this previous slide, but having a double barreled question where you're asking someone two things in the same question, but you're only asking for one response. So, an example of this again is, should Congress cut taxes and increase defense spending? Those are two separate issues. Cutting taxes and defense spending are two completely different political opinion questions and should not be mashed together. Because if you were just to answer yes immediately to the taxes part, but in reality you don't quite agree with defense spending, that person is writing down the yes to taxes. And again, then they're going to take that data, they're going to share it publicly or with a company or a party, and then it's misleading. That company then is getting bad data. And they're going to campaign on bad data or they're going to vote in a certain way that could be bad data. So again, we always want to be really conscious of how are poll questions being asked and then where is that data going, how is it being used. So a couple of more just bad examples of polling questions here because these are always really fun to look at. A bad version of this question is, what is your income? Right? At first, it's like, well, my income is, maybe $1,000 every 2 weeks. Well, is that really what they're asking for? A better way to ask this question would be, what is your total family income for the year of 2020? Right? That's really specific. Now I know, okay, you're asking for the entire year, my salary, and you're also asking for my husband's income along with mine. That is going to get you much more accurate data rather than just like, oh, I make $1,000 every 2 weeks. Oh, okay. They're going to think I'm really into poverty, when in reality, maybe I'm more middle class. Okay, so being direct with questions, really getting down to what are you wanting the information for. Another question is, who did you vote for? Right? So, okay, who did I vote for? Like, are you talking about party? Are you talking about a general election? Are you talking about in the primaries? Are you talking about national or state level? Like, there's so many questions to follow up to this polling question. So, a better version of this same information is, what candidate did you vote for in the last presidential election? Right? That's very specific, and you're asking about a specific position. Another bad example is, do you get angry when people argue against the death penalty? Right? That's not a great version of a question because it's leading. You're already attaching an emotion into a specific topic. So you could make someone feel uncomfortable with answering a certain way, or you could make them think like, "Oh, well of course I get angry," because you've already attached that emotion to this topic. So, a better way to ask on the same kind of political question is, do you favor or oppose the death penalty? You're going to get the same question, but it's going to be more reliable data because you haven't led the answerer to attach an emotion to a topic. All right, I hope this made sense. Please reach out. Let me know if you have any follow up questions. I look forward to hearing your guys' thoughts on this.